And this is Congress to our table this morning. Appreciate having you here.
Susan.
Mr. Kingston is in the House Appropriations Committee and is a member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. Yesterday, the House passed the Pentagon spending bill 395 to 34, which pays for continuing operations in Iraq and Afghanistan and other things. What should people take away from that overwhelming vote?
Well, I think that the Congress, even in a partisan atmosphere, is still unified when it comes to funding our troops, funding our mission overseas, funding procurement, quality of life, equipment modernization, the issues which people in uniform live every day. And so, you know, it's a good vote. The breakdown of it was about $124 billion for Iraq and Afghanistan, $134 billion for military personnel, which included a 3.4% pay raise, $187 billion for maintenance and operations, and about $144 billion for procurement and modernization. You know, the Predators, the drones, the unmanned aerial vehicles that are in the headlines today. Investing in that sort of equipment for modern warfare. And so this bill, which probably should have been passed first because national security, I think, is still not everybody's #1 issue, it's been sitting out there. It got caught in the discussion of, does this become the vehicle to put on raising the debt ceiling and extending the COBRA and some of the other issues that are out there. And as you know, you follow that debate closely. I think your listeners and viewers have, but that's why it passed so late in the session.
Does the bill passed yesterday include the additional monies for President Obama's 30,000 more troops in Afghanistan?
No, it does not, which I think critics might pick up on is backtrack on one of his promises to have a open and transparent military bill so that we do not have supplemental bills that fund the war. But there's the cost for those troops is $30 to $35 billion, and that was not in here.
30 to 35 billion annually, as long as the troops are deployed, correct?
Well, no, I'm saying for the surge.
Right.
The actual cost of the war that was funded in here is about $124 billion.
Let me read to you on that note about concern among liberal members of the House of Representatives about the surge. Yesterday, the Speaker had a year-end, year-in-review press conference, and here is Paul Kane in the Washington Post reporting on that. President Obama will have to argue his own case to House Democrats as he seeks support for a planned surge of 30,000 troops into Afghanistan, said the House Speaker on Wednesday, adding that she is finished asking her colleagues to back wars that they do not support. Quote, the President is going to have to make his case, Pelosi told reporters at the end of the session. Pelosi has warned of serious unrest among House Democrats about Afghanistan, said on Wednesday she intends to live up to the vow on the upcoming supplemental bill, which would require the $30 to $40 billion for the additional 30,000 troops. We have to do this for the President, then he will have to come up, this one you just passed, then he will come up with a plan, and then it's up to him to ask you for your support. What I've told members is to give the President room to listen to what he has to say, and we will provide the briefings. They will have the information, but I can't. This, for members, is a vote of conscience. War votes are votes of conscience.
You know, I don't think that that's an outrageous position. I think that having more transparency and more debate is a good thing. It's interesting that the President had run as a candidate of let's get out of Iraq and fight the real war in Afghanistan, and yet he keeps the same Secretary of Defense on, appointed by Bush, and many of the same personnel in terms of national security. And so I see how House members, particularly on the liberal anti-war side, would be a little upset with it. The other thing that I think is very important for conservatives, liberals, no matter where you are, is the mixed signals that we've gotten out of the White House in the past couple of weeks. The President said in his West Point speech, we're going to build up, we're going to draw down in 18 months. But then when General McChrystal spoke a few days later before the Armed Services Committee, he said, well, that deadline's not poured in stone. When Secretary Gates, a few days later, all within about a 48-hour period, spoke to Karzai in Afghanistan, Karzai said there's no way we can take over this operation for another 5 years, and then it'll be 15 years before we can pay for it. And then in my own committee, the Defense Committee, Secretary Panetta of Homeland Security said to us, this is a lot more complicated than the discussion has been publicly. And so we are, as House members, getting a lot of mixed signals, and I think the more sunshine, the more debate, the better for liberals, the better for conservatives.
Let's take some calls on the topic of spending money for defense. The bill passing the House of Representatives still in the Senate right now. And let's go to Austin, Texas. This is Chris on our Republican line. You're on for Congressman Kingston. Chris, turn down your TV and then ask your question, please.
Yes, ma'am. I was just curious to know how long we'll be fighting enemies that we prop up. I just found out that our CIA has been shipping these guys around from hot spots to safe zones, and I'm just curious to know how long that'll be going on and what your thought is on that.
Well, Chris, I'm not sure if this is going to answer your questions or not, but there is going to be a big debate, I think, in the next couple of years, not just about our mission in the Middle East, Afghanistan, or Iraq, but all around the world, because our military is going to need some more money. And can they get the resources that they need out of the existing $636 billion budget, or do we need to give them more money? Or do we need to say, you know what, it's time for America to stop being the policeman of the world, and perhaps these CIA operations and some of these other things we need to draw down. I will point out to you the CIA budget actually comes under Homeland Security, so it's not even included in this. Another thing that's not included in this budget is $23 billion for military construction on the bases around the country, and then another $45 billion-ish that pays for veterans' health care. And so the cost of military operations in our budget is enormous. It's $700 or $800 billion if you add everything together under the name of national security. And I'm giving you a long answer, but I think your question is really relevant because, you know, maybe we should say, do we really need to be in all the countries and doing all the operations that we're doing?
New Orleans is next. Doug, independent line for the congressman.
Let's just face it, the vote to keep on appropriating money for illegal wars is just one more blatant example that we don't have a government. We have a criminal organization that represents the military-industrial complex, and the hell with the people. That's as plain as I can say it, as plain as it can be. You bring up, the man brought up the operations of the CIA. The funding that we put into them is obviously, we shouldn't even have a CIA, and the funding that they're doing is coming from mostly from the Black Eagle gold that was confiscated from the Japanese after the Philippines that was being investigated, and the three places that got hit on 9/11 were the three places that stored the information on this secret Black Ops operation. I would ask for a new investigation, well, a new one. I would ask for an investigation, a criminal investigation of 9/11, because this whole damn thing is based on a lie.
Doug, thank you.
Well, one of the things, Doug, that on the 9/11 Commission, they actually had a lot of resources. They did a lot of hearings. I don't know if you've read that report. It's been several years since I've read it, but I did think it was fairly thorough. But I think I want to get to a broader issue, and that is transparency in government in general, so that, you know, maybe at the end of the day you and I are going to disagree on some things, but I would like you to have all the information that's out here. And one of the things that we Republicans are pushing for, if we get back in the majority, is we want to put bills online 7 days in advance so that people have an opportunity to read, well, what is in this $636 billion defense bill? You know, why is unemployment insurance in there? Should it be in there? Is that a good thing? Are satellite TV issues? Why were they put in the defense bill? There were a lot of things like that that were unrelated to it, but I would like to have people like you have the opportunity to read those bills online for 7 days and ask us questions before we vote.
There were two stories in USA Today relating to the military that I want to work into our discussion this morning. This first one, study details U.S. troops' prescription drug abuse. Here's what Greg Zoroya is reporting about a news survey. It's an updated one of 2008, which reported that about 1 in 4 soldiers admit abusing prescription drugs, most of them pain relievers, in a 1-year period, according to a Pentagon health survey released on Wednesday. The study surveyed more than 28,000 U.S. troops last year, showed that about 20% of Marines had also abused prescription drugs, mostly painkillers, in that same period. The findings show the continued toll on the military from fighting wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan since 2003. couple other stats, and then we'll come to you. The percentage of troops showing signs of post-traumatic stress disorder increased during the war years. In 2005, 7% of the service members described symptoms suggesting PTSD. A new study that has increased to 11%. And then finally this, nearly 60% of Marines who were surveyed admit engaging in binge drinking. The rate of heavy alcohol use, defined as 5 or more drinks per occasion once a week, among all service members remained higher, 18 to 35, remained higher than in the civilian population. What are you hearing there?
Well, you've thrown a lot at the table on the table.
But all of them related to stress, according to this.
And I think it's something that certainly you got stress issues out there. The bill that we passed yesterday actually had $29 billion for medical-related issues to members of the service and their family, brain trauma and psychological issues. That's all funded, and actually that's an increase in recognition of some of these problems that are out there. But I also think that there's a problem kind of like in athletics where you want to keep people off a disabled list, and so sometimes rather than treating an injury, you give a pain pill. And then people can keep on marching or whatever they're doing. And keep in mind, these rucksacks can be 75 pounds, sometimes 90. One of the things we're also studying, by the way, is how to make it lighter for them and how do we reduce the amount of injuries just from jumping out of a helicopter a distance of 2 feet, but carrying a rucksack, twisting and turning at odd angles and lifting a rifle. All that is an orthopedist nightmare, if you will. And yet we don't want to cover those things up with pain pills and have an ibuprofen army. I think all of this is something that we are committed on a bipartisan basis to study and try to figure out how do we address it and how can we do it in a better way.
Sutherland, Oregon. Craig, Democrats line. You're on.
Good morning, Susan. Thank God for C-SPAN. Susan, if I might say something just to the health care debate. Is that okay?
Sure. Briefly, please.
Okay. I agree with Howard Dean. I am more inclined to agree with Howard Dean that it seemingly has been so watered down that if the president signs it without the government, without the public option, this individual, they ought to take him out and shoot him in the kneecaps. Okay, now to the thing with the war. Okay, I agree with the president that I agree with President Obama that we need to get Osama bin Laden, but I am also inclined to agree with the last caller who called from Louisiana, I believe, and said there's a lot of nonsense going on with 9/11 and the towers. You know, I honestly believe that these were the same people who took out the Kennedys. And this individual in front of me, oh my God.
Caller, thanks. Thank you very much for the call. That was a comment, Congressman. I'm just going to move on to our next from Calman, Alabama. Janet, Republican line.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning.
Good morning. I have to make a comment that I have a tendency to agree with Ron Paul. I'm wondering what we are doing over there anyway, and what are we still having bases, Army bases and Navy bases and all these military bases all over the world anyway. I mean, we need to close them all down, bring all of our troops home, and let these other countries fend for themselves. If they want a democracy, let them, spend money and let them form their own democracies and,
Well,
Janet, thanks.
Let me say this. We're kind of darned if we do and darned if we don't. I think, number one, that the Ron Paul school of thought of, let's say, maybe let's review Americans' international policy and international adventurism, and maybe we should be more isolationist and just say, look, we really don't care what you do to each other, but if you do it to us, we're going to come in there and blow you away. I mean, I think, and I'm not trying to oversimplify Ron Paul's view of things, but I think that there is a growing discussion about that, and I don't think it's a bad discussion to have at all. I will say, however, when you disengage with the country, as we did in Afghanistan in 1989, what happened? The Taliban came in. They filled the vacuum which Russia had left, and Russia had destroyed the existing monarchy there. And then when that happened, Al-Qaeda found fertile ground to recruit and to train and so forth. And when I've been to Afghanistan, what they've said to us is, are you going to stay this time? And so I do think we have to have engagement. We have to have effective engagement, but I do think we have to have some limits, and we have to have other nations, NATO allies participating in it, and the host country stepping up to the plate themselves, and we're not seeing enough of that.
USA Today has as its lead story an issue that they've been interested for a while, the Mentors program in the military, where retired senior officers are brought back as consultants. Yesterday, the Secretary of Defense announced a review of the mentoring program. This article suggests that at least on the Senate side, Senator McCaskill is leading a Senate Oversight Committee investigation into the mentor program. I want to flip the page here so I can just give the viewers some sense of this. A USA Today review found that the Navy pays its mentors an average of $330 per hour to serve as consultants to them. The Marines, $187 per hour plus expenses. Air Force, $160 to $486 an hour to serve as mentors. Here's one other statistic. USA Today investigation published last month found that 80% of the 158 military mentors that the newspaper could identify also had ties to defense contractors.
Well, I'd say that's all relevant and all something that we should, I think, ask a lot of hard questions about and maybe discontinue the program and rebuild it completely. I don't know what the benefit is. We'd have the benefit to say, okay, is it worth all this apparent waste and overbilling? I don't know the answer to that, but one of the things that I think liberals and conservatives and independents could all get together on is inside this military budget, which is massive, the largest expenditure of the federal budget, what can we do to reduce costs and make it more effective and more efficient? And I believe, as a conservative Republican, Republicans need to measure it with the same yardstick that we apply to welfare programs and social programs that have waste that we're very concerned about. So I think it's something that Congress could actually put its best foot forward and say, let's ferret out all this stuff because the military needs stuff, but there's a lot of things that we're spending money on that we're not getting the bang for the buck.
On your subcommittee, do you believe that there would be bipartisan agreement on where to look for those areas of overspending?
I really do. We have a very good bipartisan subcommittee. You know, Jack Murtha and Bill Young get along real well. There's a lot of criticism of that committee and some of the members of the committee, but I'd say it works together fairly well. And the subcommittee just got back from a bipartisan trip to Afghanistan. Chairman Murtha took over Thanksgiving, and so I think we'd come together on that. One of the things we debate a lot are the civilian contractors, the independent contractors. There are about 250,000 in the Middle East right now, 100,000 in Iraq, and I think about 70,000 in Afghanistan. But the interesting thing is no one really knows. So when we talk about, you know, what are we spending money on, that's one of those things that we're trying to get a grip on. It's very difficult to do.
But you referenced the critiques of the committee. Chairman Murtha himself has been the subject of a number of them because of his ties to military contractors. How can the subcommittee credibly look at spending with those kinds of allocations?
You know, I don't think it has to be limited to that committee. You know, we are the spending committee, but you also have an authorizing committee that reviews the programs, and then you have a budget committee. And then the Speaker can always appoint a select committee, as the Senate must be doing with Senator McCaskill. So I think that there are some opportunities to put in third-party oversight, and, you know, let's make sure everybody comes together on it. But I will say, just because you're on the committee doesn't mean you're suspect and can't, you know, fairly look at reducing the cost of it. And there are a lot of outside groups that watch military spending. Some want to plus it up, some want to reduce it. So I think you could get the brain power out there. You just have to have the conviction. And I think you could actually do it with the White House as well.
We're talking to Congressman Jack Kingston about defense spending as the House overwhelmingly passed the bill yesterday. Senate considering it right now. Carbondale, Colorado. Patrick, independent, you're on the air.
Good morning. I had a couple of quick questions for the congressman there. First of all, what defense contractors are in your district?
I can only think of one small one that makes something for. I don't have major defense contractors in my district. As you know, they're all over the place. But
sure. Okay. All right. Second question would be, who are you expecting to pay for these war expenses? Are you planning a war tax?
I think it should come out of general revenue. As you know, there is a proposal for a surtax that Chairman of Appropriations Committee, Mr. Obey, has proposed, but it does not even have the support of the Speaker right now. So I think it's a legitimate question, and that's one reason why we need to determine what our mission is in Afghanistan and have a clear signal from the White House as to, what are we going to do? They've already backed off the 18-month exit, so, I'm open to discuss it as I think we should.
Patrick, what's your bottom line? Why are you asking this?
And I think the rest of the country is. And I think that when we send people to Congress and they approve these massive kinds of spending bills without any, clear direction on how something's going to be paid for, it's just unconscionable. Thank you.
Well, I think that one of the issues that we've got to deal with is spending in general. As you know, the deficit this year is the highest in history, the highest by about 3 times at $1.4 trillion. It's almost laughable that the U.S. Senate, after spending a massive spending bill, and by the way, military spending this year I think is up about 3%. Other non-military spending is up 12%. But after passing the omnibus bill, which was a big spending increase, 12% without military, the Senate turned around and said, you know what we need is a commission on spending. Well, hey, how about just cutting the budget? Now, I support a commission on spending as well, but, some of it's just fiscal discipline. Don't pass a big spending bill, then turn around and start talking about fiscal discipline. It's hypocritical.
Next call is East Adam, Connecticut. This is Joe, Democrats line. Good morning, Joe.
Hi, good morning. I have a simple question. Is the cost $150 billion a year in addition to having a standing army?
No, it's not. Now, there's about $134 billion for personnel, which includes about 1.2 million personnel. In fact, just the breakdown, it's about 569,000 members in the Army, 200,000 in Guard Reserve, about 331 in the Navy, about 328 in the Air Force. Coast Guard, I think, is around 20,000 and 200,000 in the Marines. And that is in that $134 billion. The additional cost of 30,000 new troops, sending them to Afghanistan, is not in this budget, and that'll be another $30 to $35 billion that we're going to have to come back in several months and fund that.
Next call is from Rockville, Maryland. Kenneth, Republican line. Good morning.
Hello.
You're on,
Can
Kenneth.
you hear me?
We sure
Yes.
can.
Yeah, I got a real quick question. I'm a former U.S. Marine. I served in 4 wars. And what I don't understand, and I don't think a lot of people caught this on a broadcast that I caught, when did we go from searching for Osama bin Laden to fighting a drug war in Afghanistan, and why are we pumping so much money over there to the war when they want to bring the troops back in 18 months? But yet I'm on disability. I make $1,200 a month. But inflation, they're saying there's no inflation. I just got from the Social Security office stating that I can't get a cost of living raise because of inflation. Well, if you go to the supermarket, what used to cost $1 is now $2, and the box is even smaller. So if that's not inflation, what is? And here, I went and fought for this country, and, it really gets my goat. And now I'm on disability because of that. And, and I had to fight almost 3 years to get my disability.
Kenneth, thank you.
Well, number one, on that Social Security COLA, it is tied into a market basket of goods and services. It's a weighted average. Generally, it's better than inflation. In fact, if you tied Social Security in with inflation across the board, sometimes the COLA would actually be less. Last year, as you know, was 5.7%, and that was probably better than most Americans got. I know that doesn't do you any good. If you're getting by on $1,200 a month, that's pretty tight, particularly after all that you've done for our country, which we're very appreciative of. But I think part of the military question here, in a broader sense, is that when you have soldiers, 1.2 million active duty right now, they will all hopefully become retirees one day, and you need to take care of them as well. So part of our challenge is quality of life, not just for the active duty, but for their years down the road. And that's one reason why medical health care, psychological health care is so important to everyone.
This Twitter message from Stephen Sauer, $30 to $40 billion to take care of 30,000 troops. This is for the surge proposal. You've got to be kidding. I'd like to ask you, what is it about operations in Afghanistan that the estimates of about $1 billion plus per soldier come from?
You know what? That is an excellent question, and that is one that we need to get our hands on. Now my number is a little bit less than $1 million a soldier, but it is about $660,000 per soldier. And the question that really is alarming, and I think it's classified, you can't get a grip on it, is what is the Taliban budget? And we know it's considerably less than $30 billion for soldiers, for a surge of soldiers. That's not the total, of course. So, you know, you do have to have transportation costs. You do have to have specialized equipment. You are fighting an enemy that isn't recognizable, and so intelligence is very important. Unmanned vehicles, using all of the above to try to minimize collateral damage, which the enemy isn't worried about. That costs you a lot more money. Feeding everybody, we're fighting for a poor nation that's not really helping us kick in. But I think the question is a great question, and it's something that we need to find out. Why do we have to spend so much more than the other guys? And so, you know, these are very good things that we need to pursue.
Got one more story for you.
And I want to say again, Democrats and Republicans can agree that these things should be researched. And so I welcome it.
More story. Wall Street Journal front page. Insurgents hack U.S. drones. $26 software used to breach key weapons in Iraq. Here's the headline. Militants in Iraq have used $26 off-the-shelf software to intercept live video feeds from U.S. Predator drones, potentially providing them with the information they need to evade or monitor U.S. military operations.
It's absolutely terrifying because, as you know, with technology, you can always break into it. If you see somebody in the airport on a Bluetooth, you can hack into his conversation right now with very little sophistication. And there's a lot of money spent around the world figuring out how to break into not just drones and unmanned aerial vehicles, but Department of Defense computers, the Center for Disease Control computers, Department of Treasury computers. Hackers all over the world are trying to break into those all day long. And so one of the things that we're actually funding in this bill is cybersecurity. Armstrong Atlantic University in Savannah, Georgia is one of the leaders in this, but there's a lot of other groups, and I happen to be familiar with them because I'm from Savannah, but there are a lot of other groups that are trying to figure out, well, how do you build those walls that could keep a $26 program from breaking in? And it's outrageous when you think about all the money that we've spent on these weapon systems.
Last question from our viewers for you. Waycross, Georgia. Ray, Independent Line.
Yes. First I want to thank Representative Kingston for the job that he does in standing for what is right. But I want to address the issue that we spoke of a few minutes ago on drug use and the post-traumatic syndrome within our troops. I think we see so much more of that today because our Congress is like the Congress of Vietnam. So many of those people are professional congressmen, professional senators that have been there forever, and their mindset has not changed. The liberal mindset of Congress right now is what is bringing this country down and bringing our troops down. They don't have the support of our government, and the liberals are twisting the minds of the American people so they feel they're not supported over here. I think that's where the post-traumatic stress comes from.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I'm looking forward to doing in a few hours is catching a flight back to Savannah, Georgia. I won't be in Waycross this weekend, but I come there frequently, as you know. One of the things I think is very important for members of Congress to do is get the heck out of Washington. This town truly is a bubble, and you get filtered information, and you get information from people who have a vested interest in giving it to you a certain way. So I think it's very important for all of us to get the heck out of town and listen to people. And when I'm home, I like to go to Fort Stewart and talk to the troops. And as you know, they're on their 4th deployment over there. But they're under a lot of stress, though, I think, because we've been in Afghanistan for 8 years. And we're not sure how much longer we're going to be there. And our soldiers like achievement. They like to say, okay, what is the goal? Is it clear? Is it understandable? Can we obtain it? And when are we going to obtain it? What's the deadline? Because I want to go on to another mission. And I think we have failed to do that, both with the Bush administration and now with the Obama administration. But I think staying in touch with the people back home and the soldiers is extremely important.
Mr. Kingston, thank you very much for being here. I know you come a couple times a year, and we appreciate it. Happy holidays to you.
Well, same to you, Susan.